Hey everybody, this is Gregory from Dapp University. So today I've got a guest on the channel. I've got Lawson Baker here. He's an investor and an advisor at Relay Zero to talk about the digital dollar. And I know that a lot of people have mixed opinions about this. We're going to hear Lawson's perspective on this. So before we get into all that, be sure to subscribe to the channel, click the like button down below, and join me in welcoming Lawson to the channel. So welcome.
Hey, yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Very opinionated on stablecoins, digital dollar, and kind of the future where that goes. And so happy to be on.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited to get into this. So really quickly, let's just set this up, define some basics in case someone's jumping into the conversation and needs a little bit of a context. In your words, what is a stable coin? What's it for? What is, how do you use it as digital currency? Before we kind of even get into the pros and cons of what a digital dollar is, maybe we should talk about what a digital dollar could be at all in the first place.
Sure. So a stable coin is an alternative to something like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's price is obviously very volatile. And what a stable coin's role is to be stable in price relative to another off-chain asset. Most common stable coins are stable to the US dollar. These stable coins can either be backed by US dollars, so you could actually redeem the token for dollars in a bank account somewhere, or via incentives and different mechanisms, you can have what's called crypto native stable coins, like DAI, D-A-I, which is part of the MakerDAO system. In the context of the digital dollar, that's most like a fiat-backed stable coin. Or a dollar in a bank account or a trust that's tokenized.
Right, totally. And the whole reason we're having this conversation in the first place is because of some legislation that was kind of getting jammed through in the United States. Giving context with this whole thing, right now, the time of recording this video, we're still in the midst of this global pandemic craziness. And, basically in the U.S., a lot of the economy was just frozen solid, right? It was basically the government said non-essential businesses cannot operate. In many cases, right? It's really, really hairy. So in the midst of that, we had some legislation go through to provide some economic stimulus, and we had kind of hidden in there the desire to, or at least the proposal for a digital dollar, which we've seen crop up in the past, cropped up here again. And what happened with this?
Yeah, so I think it was in the House first, or maybe the Senate first. It ended up not being included in the final $2 trillion stimulus. The problem they were trying to solve for is how do you give money directly to people and individuals? And so the bill that ended up passing has like $1,200, I think, up to $1,200 that you or I could claim. And how they actually get that money to people is a little bit of a logistical problem because it's not like they just happen to know all of your bank accounts, where you want the money to go, what's your current address. And some people may not have bank accounts. They may be like quasi-banked or unbanked. And so there's this huge logistical issue about how do you get money to the people and businesses. And so the proposal came out was to let's just go ahead and just make the dollar digital dollar, and give people money directly by allowing for people to get a digital dollar wallet. They used a lot of kind of buzz terms per se in crypto wallet and things like that. But the reality is, the dollar's already digital. You have digital dollars in your bank account. They don't actually have the cash sitting in their vaults many times. And so it's literally a Amazon server somewhere in a database that says Lawson's got $100 and or $1,000, and if they didn't have good operating controls, somebody could change that. And the same is true for the banks. The banks also have a digital ledger. except their ledger is held internally for their users and then externally with the Fed. And so they actually have Fed accounts. And so Fed accounts is kind of like their ledger of digital dollars with the Fed and what they can do with it and how many loans they can issue, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's easy for the Fed to inject money into banks, but it's harder to inject money into the end users of the banks. And so the digital dollar proposal was trying to address that. And so I had a tweet string, and that's why you reached out to me. Basically, I was highlighting like, hey guys, like this is not about digital dollars. This is about accounts. Specifically, in short, people would effectively get Fed accounts. And that sounds cool. It definitely sounds like a logistical solution that's way better. Just go straight to the Fed to get your stimulus money. The proposal, really the only functionality of it was you would get an account there, but all you would do is log in or create an account and then name the bank account you want to withdraw to. So it had no functionality. There's no debit card on it. There's no way to really spend it. They would just require you to withdraw that. And basically what I was trying to highlight is this is like phase one of eventually everyone having direct access to the Fed. And that can be good and that can be bad. The good, I guess, is people who need money or need the stimulus, and, a lot of people are right now, is you have an account with the Fed, and when they pass money to be able to send it to you, when Congress passes money, it could be in the account, the next day with not a lot of logistical lifting. The bad to that is there are a lot of privacy concerns and concerns about what you can do with your money, or more specifically, what the government can do with your money if they have direct oversight into everything you do with it, transaction history, et cetera, and control of the ledger. I was talking about the Fourth Amendment, but obviously the First Amendment would be relevant as well. Could they censor your transactions because they don't like what you're spending it on? And is that a First Amendment violation? And in the same way, if they control the ledger and you owe the IRS money, like they can kind of just change it and take it. And obviously we have courts that make that really hard. But clearly when they have the direct tool to be able to do it, as opposed to they have to send a request to a bank. Believe it or not, banks actually have processes for reviewing government requests for information, and in some cases pushing back or fighting against that. And the same is true for fintechs. And so I'm not saying the bank's barrier is perfect, because generally they have regulators, they want to do what the regulators ask for, but it is a slight line of defense. And so my concern with the digital dollar specifically is what type of control do you give your government when not only are they printing the money, they now control the ledger of your money, which in my opinion just changes the game completely.
Yeah, totally. So it sounds like there's all kinds of issues here. What do you think? What do you think is the biggest concern of yours out of all these things? Like, what would be the chief number one concern?
For me, it's privacy. I think private money, privacy and money is very important. When you spend money in your Bank of America account, in your company, or for example, and you're acquiring another company, like your competitors don't see that. Yes, the bank sees that. Yes, the bank's regulators see that. But there is some level of kind of privacy of how I'm spending my money as a business or a person. And I've written about this for crypto specifically. I released a post January 1st of this year, basically highlighting that crypto is completely failing at privacy, because blockchains, obviously all transactions are public. And the same would be potentially true for this type of digital dollar, depending on the type of ledger they have. All transactions would be public, not just to the government, but to advertisers, anybody that wanted to track you. I think privacy is a huge concern, because without privacy, it then leads to the next issue. Like, if you have private money and how you spend it, you're less likely to be censored on a First Amendment issue. And the same is true with Fourth Amendment and search and seizure. If your money is private and the transactions of your money is private, it makes the desire to seize the money harder because they don't know what you're spending it on. And so I think privacy is very fundamental to the First and the Fourth Amendment to functionally be able to operate the way we want it to. And so my concern is definitely the privacy, because if you fix privacy, it solves the other problems.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it seems to me like the most likely way for a government to act, I don't want to say nefariously, but in their interest over your interest would be privacy, right? Basically, their ability to read any information about you and do with that information whatever they want to. Or like you said earlier, it's very possible for them just to like debit from your account at will, right? But this seems like a way that they would definitely, I don't want to say take advantage of you, but maybe take advantage of you without you really knowing about it. How would you know?
The government is not default bad. But the more power you give to the government, it makes it easier to be bad. And the entire reason we have, amendments to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is to make sure the individuals retain a certain amount of power. And I think personally, this is giving too much power to the money. Now the money printer, not only do they print the money, but they also control how much of it you have, regardless of as we've left paper money, they literally can take it at will. And for me, we've gone beyond slippery slope. That's a horrible idea.
Right. Yeah, we're already in the situation where we have a Fed who can essentially control the money supply, and now they have ability to control. We've removed the layer of the banks in between you and the Fed, basically.
Yeah. From my perspective, the dollar should be tokenized. Let's forget digital. I think dollars should be tokenized. I'm a believer generally in stable coins. While I prefer the crypto native ones, the fiat-backed ones have value. When I say value, they have utility because it's programmatic money. Before, I went to law school to get into investment banking. I was in investment banking for 4 or 5 years, and then I joined a startup called Synapse FI, which was the first banking API in the U.S. And in 2014 and 2015, APIs were rather new, and there were definitely no banking APIs. And that's how I ended up getting into the crypto space, because our first customers were crypto exchanges, Kraken, Abra, Zappo. We were back up to Coinbase, you name it. And that led me down the rabbit hole of crypto. And what it looked like to me is like banking APIs were the future of banking and fintech generally. But there was to me, it was a bridge technology. It was a bridge technology to something else, and that was cryptocurrencies and potentially also stable coins. We actually worked on a stable coin at Synapse back in 2000 and spring of 15. So this was like Tether technically did exist at the time, but nobody was using it really. There was one other. It was
very early.
Yeah, there was one other stable coin, and I was helping the founder write a white paper on it. We ended up abandoning it and focusing really on the APIs because APIs seemed to have a broader impact at the time. Looking at stable coins today, so you have Tether, which is quasi shadow banking / a legit stable coin. And then you have something like USDC, which is Coinbase and Circle. And you have Trust Token, which TrueUSD, which is Trust Token. And they hold other funds with Prime Trust. There are a number of just fiat-backed stablecoins that are kind of interesting today. And the way I look at those is those are likely more competitive to banking APIs than they are to cryptocurrencies. And the reason being is because banking APIs are super powerful. They're awesome. So Synapse's APIs allow for you to hit an endpoint to create an account, a business account or consumer account or FBO account, move money, ACH, check, wire, issue debit card. Basically anything that a bank could do, Synapse tries to turn that into an API. That's good, but the nature of the beast of the API is a function of what's below it, the bank. And so how do you create a user? How do you verify a user? Is very bank specific. And how do you go through the KYC and AML obligations? Then the next question is, how do you interact with the other banks? And the reality is most banks don't have APIs. And so the way you interact with other banks from maybe your bank account API is you must go back down to the bank layer, to their core, and then to ACH and Nacha or to Fedwire. And you get to go through all these different systems, okay? And so if you wanted like real-time payments or different things, you have to like be reliant on a system below the API, the banking core, ACH, Fedwire, and or integrate with multiple APIs, with multiple developer experiences, different endpoints for the same thing, multiple ways that you have to verify a consumer at this bank is different than a consumer at that bank. And all these silos, these information silos. And so when you look at stablecoins, they don't have that. I don't have to integrate with Bank of America and Synapse's banking API. I just need to know how to interact with a smart contract, right. And be able to run a node on Ethereum or whatever blockchain it's issued on. And the developer experience for that is much better. There's no question. There's no user creation. There's no user verification. That's only a problem if the user wants to redeem the stablecoin. You as a wallet creator or you as an exchange just have to integrate with the smart contract. And that, in a very similar way to the internet, developers started building tools for the internet because it was an open, protocol of how you pass around information on the internet in IP and like IP addresses and how DNS resolves domain requests, and all that was open, and that led to like developers all over the world just building things because they saw how to interact with it. And that's part of the power with blockchains and open infrastructure that anybody can integrate against. Unlike a banking API that requires API keys, compliance approvals, et cetera, anybody can integrate with fiat-backed stablecoins, and so those can and will continue to grow. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, totally. So I want to kind of hit on another thing you mentioned a minute ago, which is your desire for the dollar to be tokenized. So the main, when you say tokenized, do you also mean having some sort of governance model where it has a fixed issuance, or that like only a certain amount can be created? Are we talking about like limiting? Maybe explain the benefits that you're trying to achieve there, so I understand clearly what you're talking about.
In the context of private companies tokenizing the dollar, USDC, Tether, TUSD, their supply is only limited by people's desire to deposit, to get tokens, or to withdraw and burn the tokens. Gotcha. And so the supply of TUSD or something like that would fluctuate based off of people's desire to own it and eventually redeem it or buy more. Mm-hmm. In the context of a tokenized dollar by the Fed, the supply is up to the Fed. As we all know, money printer go bear. They can print as much as they want. And I really feel like the hilarity of the numbers that were coming out, $2 trillion, no, let's do $6 trillion. At some point, people just realize it's all funny money. I actually had friends who I've been like slowly red pilling back home, like texting me and calling me and like, dude, like this money's not real. I'm like, I know. I've been telling you that.
And maybe you can help clarify this to people watching too, because there's a little bit of hand waving that kind of goes on, a little bit of a shell game where it's like, yeah, we're not really printing money, but we're like buying things that we already know. You know what I mean? 100%. It's like
so they are printing money. Some of that printed money is deployed to $1,200 an individual. Some of it's deployed to buy financial market products to support the stock market or support loans.
Right.
Various QE, quantitative easing measures. But the reality is there is no finite supply of dollars as much as the Fed can print and desires to print, they can't. Traditionally, when they print money by enabling banks to issue loans. And so the way banks work is they have reserve requirements. And
the fractional reserve system.
Yeah. So if they have $100 deposited in their bank total, they can they can loan up to and only have a 10% reserve rate ratio, which effectively allows for them to multiply money, right?
Yeah, it basically have the effect of more money flowing throughout the economy that actually exists.
Yeah, basically banks are the actual money printers, but they're empowered to print the money by the Fed. And I forgot why I was saying that. It was the exact question again.
Well, yeah, part of it was clarifying kind of how this works, because some people get confused by it, and they read the meme, and then people critique it. They go, "Oh, they're not actually printing money because of, and it's they still are."
Yeah. Effectively, they're injecting more cash into society, but under the idea that we needed to support and get easy money to people, to lower interest rates, to get the economy, people to willing to take a risk again. If cash is easy to get, then they'll take risks. They'll invest it in a new technology, or they'll lend it out more because they have a whole bunch more to sit around and make any money. I'm not going to debate the good and the bad of that, but it's very clear that in the context of fiat money is an alternative to commodity money. Previously, before 1972, the dollar was redeemable for gold. Right. And most government-issued currencies, or before that, even bank-issued currencies, was redeemable for something in a bank somewhere. And then in the 70s, we left the gold standard, and we entered in what's called fiat money. And this money is really only as valuable as people perceive it. It has no... Right. You can't redeem it for something. It is in and of itself. I think a lot of core believers in Bitcoin, which, as I mentioned, is a different experiment to the stable coins, is money supply and creation is super important to those people. And the value of your money is important, and people want it to be predictable. The unpredictability of supply of dollar can and will likely lead to inflation or deflation. Right now, the dollar, if you live in, my friend is working remote in Colombia, it used to cost him approximately $4 to eat a meal, but now it's like $2. And so the fluctuation to get to other currencies can be good or bad. If you're an expat outside of the U.S. and you earn in dollars, it's really good. Right. But there's obviously another side to that trade. And so, the desire in the cryptocurrency community, Bitcoin specifically, is predictability and money supply, and this idea of hard money that's actually redeemable for something.
Right. Yeah, totally. That makes perfect sense. So let me ask you this. We've seen this digital dollar thing pop up, got squashed. Do you think that there will be a time soon that this thing will rear its head again? Can you think of some kind of circumstance where it makes sense? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The Fed is actually talking about trying to update their FedWire system to enable more real-time payments between banks. And it's slated for 2024 or 2023 or something like that, which is, for me, it's kind of hilarious. I personally think, especially in other countries, maybe like China or South Korea, they're definitely going to have FedCoin or tokenized fiat currency very soon. They're going to deploy their own version of a blockchain or distributed ledger, likely in a way that they can control the supply, likely in a way that they can track where all the money can go. And that's going to be a competitive advantage eventually, because anybody, again, can program against these and use these tokens. And I believe for the U.S. to stay competitive economically, it needs to make sure its dollar is best in class. And people say, and I agree, the dollar is the best. Our best export is the dollar. That's why we can print the dollar, $2 trillion, and it not meaningfully affect the value of it. Maybe today, maybe, or at least not noticeably at launch. And that's because people outside of the U.S. desire the dollar. There's this whole movement in dollarization. And a lot of the early stage crypto startups, especially the 14, 15, and 16ers, were all focusing on payments, and in some cases, micropayments. In the context of payments, we had a lot of these remittance type companies. It was like how to get dollars from America to Mexico, or otherwise is trying to replace the SWIFT network. SWIFT network is how you move money internationally between banks, and trying to do it with reduce as many of the fees, because there's a whole lot of like people in between the money from your bank account to your friend's money in Mexico. Trying to reduce the number of people in between, make it cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. The technology was not really ready at the time, but largely those weren't. People knew how to move money internationally, and so some of the more interesting payments in South America and elsewhere. One's AirTM. There's some other ones as well. They give people access to dollars, and in Colombia or Venezuela. And as they're interviewing these users, they're like, "Yo, get some Bitcoin, blah blah blah," and they're like, "I don't care how I move it. I just know I need stability," because they have mass inflation and things like that. And so while Bitcoin is cool and censorship resistant is cool, what they really just want is, like, when they have money, they don't want to lose the money just because the money, their government is really bad at finance. They don't want to deal with deflation. And so the idea, when the dollar is tokenized, every world citizen can be a U.S. dollar holder. They can't do that today because while banks can technically open accounts for foreign individuals, in practice they don't, or make it very hard. And then outside of the U.S., some banks will allow you to hold dollars or make you convert it. It's just the access to dollars is very limited. And so this idea of dollarization is, forget the U.S., like crypto and stablecoins is not solving a problem in the U.S. yet. It's more likely solving a problem for international people who want stable money, and the benefits of being able to control it themselves is great too, because they can walk across the border and still have their money. They don't have to carry it out in bags. And they don't have to pass some sort of weird approval process. They just they got them, and that removing of the barrier is going to make the dollar explode if done well. The risk and the counter to that, and I've talked and tweeted a lot about this, is, in my opinion, privately issued stablecoins like Tether USDC are at risk of and have a shelf life, and the shelf life of stablecoins issued by private companies is effectively a compliance problem. And the analogy is previously prepaid cards. Prepaid cards were kind of like debit cards, except because of the way they were set up, instead of a debit card where you have an account with the bank, they had a omnibus account that was for benefit of FBO, all the users on top. And so what that allowed for them to do is it allowed for the bank not to actually technically have to worry about who the end user was of the prepaid card. And it was kind of sort of a workaround on how to get cheap deposits without having to do the compliance on users. That led to a lot of platforms built, like quasi-banking fintech platforms built on prepaid cards with really poor consumer protection practices. And so actually after 2008 and 2009, they cracked down on that whenever they created the consumer protection CFPB or whatever it is. They started cracking down on prepaid cards. They basically said, yo, you're basically holding consumer accounts. And so they just made the rules the same for the omnibus account as the individual accounts. And the way tokenized dollars work, like USDT or USDC, is they have an omnibus bank account in the same way that the prepaid cards did. And they're kind of going under the same weird prepaid thing, except they're pretending like they're not a prepaid provider. And they don't really know who all the money is. And so what the regulatory story looks like this. Regulator comes in for the annual exam and they're like, oh, cool, deposits are growing. Like, what's going on? We're like, well, we got this user, and we got this new like tokenized dollar program. They're like, ah, cool. It's like, it's gotten pretty big. Tell me about it. And they tell them about it and they're like, okay, cool. So whose money is this? And they'll be like, well, when people buy the dollars, we KYC and AML them, and then they move around on this ledger, magically on a blockchain somewhere. And we don't know who that is. But if they want to redeem it, no worries. We KYC and we AML them as well. And so we know the user at the end and the beginning.
Right.
And the regulator's going to be like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And they're going to say, hey, maybe next time we come next year, you should tell me whose all money this is.
Right.
And what's going to happen? What's going to happen is they're going to come back and, 10% is going to be sitting in maybe an offshore gambling operation or maybe an exchange that has poor KYC, AML processes, whatever. It could be a good business or bad business, but the perception of bad business for banking is like the bar is like pretty low. And so at some point, what that means is they're going to just freeze tokens. And so these fiat-based stablecoins, as I mentioned, are a different experiment to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because they are not permissionless. They are not trust minimized. They very much have compliance requirements that they're just kind of sitting in a gray zone right now because regulators don't know what to do with it. But yeah, I mean, so that's the negative of stablecoins. I believe they could have a shelf life, which is why something like DAI, a crypto native stablecoin, gets super interesting for that international user. They don't have to worry about that potential shelf life or getting blacklisted later on. DAI is, in theory, controlled by no one, and they can hold it, and it holds very close to the value of the dollar. And it feels very much like the trust minimized version of Bitcoin, except it's low volatility. And I think that's super powerful. And so I think, the amount of crypto native stablecoins will likely grow exponentially in addition to, fiat backed ones.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be exciting to see. Well, yeah, I'm excited to see what happens to this over the long term. It's going to be a really interesting ride. Lawson, man, this has been a really great discussion. So if anyone's been watching this up to this point, I'm sure they've gotten lots of great insight from you. You mentioned you do advising and things like that. If anyone wants to contact you with those types of services, is that something that you're interested in?
Yep. The website is relayzero.com, but reach out to me on Twitter. It's LWSN Baker, Baker, on Twitter, where I tweet and yell all things crypto. My DMs, I respond to the private DMs, so just hit me up there. I generally help with kind of product strategy and positioning in addition to compliance and banking, general fintech type of questions as well.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's been a really great discussion. We'll see what happens with the digital dollar. I really like your perspective on this. It's been, I've learned a lot from this conversation as well. So everybody join me in thanking Lawson for being on the channel today. If you have any questions, feel free to hit him up. It's been great, Lawson. Until next time, thanks for watching Dapp University.
Appreciate it. Bye.